to Storytime with Captain Xavier. I am Chaylo Laurino and I play Captain Xavier here and on YouTube and in video games and in various other places. And long ago now, I did a lot of medieval recreation under that name, and you have opted to hear another one of the stories from my days in the Empire of Adria. Previous story was the first border war, and this is the story of the second border war, the sequel, as it were, which was on a much grander scale, but unfortunately didn't work out quite as well. Kind of a tragedy. The first border war was fought between my subdivision. I was the Duke of a subdivision known as Alhambra in those days, which consisted of Washington, Idaho, western Montana, and British Columbia. We conquered British Columbia during my reign. And this was a war with Oregon, which was the Shire of Gloucester at the time. That war was fought over the, they invaded my land, and so we went to war. You can watch that story and get all of that. This took place the next year, and Alhambra, my subdivision, started preparing for the second border war about 2 weeks before the first border war. We had wanted the first border war to be a fun war, just divide the two sides up evenly and just fight it out, and so they could learn what war is like, and then in a year we could do a proper us versus you war, and we figured it'd be a lot more fun. That wasn't how it ended up panning out. Again, go watch that one. It's hilarious. But we were already preparing for the second one. We knew, what I wanted my armies to be like. I started organizing my smaller subdivisions called cantons, because we had, pockets of members generally focused around large metropolitan areas. And so each one of those ended up being their own little company, is what I organized them into. So they had their own banner, their own colors, their own uniforms, their own NCO corps, all of that, as is most common in armies. And so we started getting that all set up about 2 weeks before the first border war, and so by the time of the second border war, we were well and thoroughly prepared. Gloucester started preparing for the second border war about 2 weeks before the second border war, and it showed. And a lot of that was just inexperience, because once again, they'd only had the one major war, and that was against us, whereas we'd had, 5 years of progressive wars to get us to where we were. But they ended up having a far better showing than I was expecting, and at the same time I was terribly disappointed by the outcome. And it showed. We continued with the storyline, because the first one was, of course, they invaded my land, and then I marched an army down to teach them what's what. After we defeated them, Dorn, their leader, Viceroy, was made to swear fealty, and swear to never, fight war against us again, and should we go to war, they would join in. And this was all part of, just fun and silliness and nothing actually binding in any way. Because we knew we wanted to do this war every year. It'd be a great excuse for the two subdivisions to get together, have a war over something, and the story would evolve and change, and it would stay interesting, and that was the goal. Again, didn't work out, unfortunately. But by the time that the next war happened, by the second border war, Alhambra had doubled in size. We were now an archduchy. I was now Archduke, Captain.xavier de Normandy. And Gloucester also doubled in size. They were now the Duchy of Gloucester. Gloucester. I will pronounce it differently every time just to annoy those Britons watching. So they were now the Duchy of Gloucester, and Dorn was now the Duke. And he had the shiny crown that I told him everything will get better once you have the shiny crown, and he unfortunately believed that and caused him no end of trouble. Tragedy. We actually held an entire war just as drill, as training, as practice for this war, which was kind of shows you the level that we were at. We practiced in companies, and we practiced siege warfare, both doing the attacking as well as how to repel an attacking army and all of that, and it was a lot of fun. But the storyline continued. At this time, a year has passed, and they are the good people of Gloucester are tired of suffering under the yoke of the oppressive pirate captain Duke and his army of vagrants, and are going to attempt to win their freedom by invading my land and taking one of my border castles and then negotiating for their independence. So the first one they hosted, so it was held in Oregon in a park just across the border, and they were the ones who ran the war and had set up all the scenarios and all of that. And then the second year, we were hosting, and that was the plan. Is that it would switch back and forth. They would host, we would host, they would host. So who was invading who would switch back and forth, and that would affect the storyline and all of that. And so we chose a location that was as center as we could get it, because we had people coming down from Canada, we had people coming from Montana, we had people coming from Idaho, we had people coming from Oregon, all meeting in this state park. And we'd contacted the state park and said, here's what our plans are, what do you guys think? And they thought, well, that's fantastic, that'd be wonderful, sounds like fun, can we come watch? And like, yeah, if you want, I'll put you in a suit of armor and swing a sword at you. Yay! Train? And so we had, in the first border war, I had brought a castle to the event. It wasn't a defensible one. It was really just 2 of those 10 by 20 foot carports and then a little bit of wall in between them just to be our castle. This year we told them that next year you are going to have to lay siege to a castle. I will make something that is actually defendable, something that is actually assaultable, and that we will be fighting over this fortification. Now it's still going to be made up of carports and tarp walls and all of that, because it had to be mobile. We had to be able to set it up. We had to be able to tear it down. It had to be, and it had to be built on a starving college student's budget. So, there were limitations, but it was functional. It had 2 towers. It had a curtain wall, which had 2 towers that you could actually get up inside. So the archers actually did have, a height advantage. And then there was a wall with crenellations going all the way around it. We had a functioning drawbridge that could be pulled up and dropped. We then had an inner curtain wall, which consisted of 3 of those 10 by 20 foot carports, one of which had a tower in it. So once again, we had elevated archers, and I could get up in the upper tower and oversee the battlefield and all of that. We then had there was a door on that. In the outer curtain wall, we had siege engines, we had trebuchets, ballistas, at least 1 onager. We had, hundreds of arrows. I mean, not hundreds of arrows, but we had a lot of arrows and a lot of archers. We had javelins aplenty. We had, again, organized companies and organized squads with their own lieutenants and their own NCO corps. We obviously had the crew under my command as part of the main command column. And yeah, it was something that you could actually lay siege to. There were rules on how you could destroy the drawbridge. There were rules on how you could break down the door. You couldn't actually destroy the walls because there wasn't an easy way to remove the walls. We could have if we'd spent enough time and if we had enough people, where somebody hits to a wall would actually take down a wall panel, and if we could have made it so they came down, but that was a little too complicated for what we had resources for at the time. But they could take out the door, and they could attack it. And so yeah, they built siege engines, but unfortunately they didn't start building them until like 2 weeks before the war, and so they weren't able to get any of their trebuchets working. They actually built 3 full-size trebuchets, decent, 10-foot, 8-foot, 10-foot throwing arm trebuchets, but they didn't have enough time to do the R&D to actually make them fire properly. They did also build a ballista off of our design, which worked beautifully, and was probably one of the more dangerous things on the battlefield. We also had a trebuchet built by Sir Mikos, and he had done the math on exactly how to design this, the exact ratios of the throwing arm to the lever arm to the length of the basket to the weight. He had it on wheels so it would roll and all of it. And he named it the Messenger. And yeah, it had a full 10-foot throwing arm. You could have actually laid sieged with this. It wouldn't have been like a full war wolf with a 50-foot throwing arm, but 10-foot throwing arm trebuchet is still very effective in siege warfare if you have enough cover for it. So we had that set up inside the curtain wall, as well as some much smaller ones that fired smaller rounds, and a pair of ballistas, at least a pair of ballistas. Yeah, and they had 3 trebuchets and 1 ballista. The trebuchets, unfortunately, did not operate, which made it impossible for them to take out the castle wall. The ballista still could have, but they weren't ever able to. But like I said, they had doubled in numbers, and that was actually largely due to me and the crew in another organization, because if you will recall from previous stories, the crew was not founded in the Empire of Adria. It was founded in the realms of Avalon, which was a group that broke away from the Empire of Adria And there's a long and sordid backstory there, but moral of the story is they decided they didn't like the crew because we were getting too powerful and we were not under their control, and they saw us as a threat to their power, which I can't even argue with that. I personally had no interest in ever trying to become king of Avalon. I had no desire to try to run that organization. It would have been a nightmare. But if somebody else had come along that wanted to take over, and they hired the crew, we probably would have tipped the balance and they would have won. So arguably we were a threat to their control, and so they decided they wanted to get rid of us. And so they in one of the wars they held, they did everything they could to make us absolutely miserable. They changed the rules on us, they cheated, they did just horrible and mean things. And you have to remember, most of my guys were high school kids. They didn't understand why all this was happening. And some of the other members of Avalon, especially the ones that were from further away, the ones who were local, to the Moscow area where we were centered, they kind of understood the history and the dynamic and all of what was going on there. But there had a bunch of people who joined in Oregon who didn't understand. Because they saw the pirates as, these guys are fun, they do all this cool stuff, they do the marching, the soldier thing, the piratey thing with the sea shanties, and they're always helping everyone set up, and they're always helping everyone tear down, and they're always willing to teach, and they seem like great guys. Why are you being so mean to them? Well, we're trying to get them to quit. We don't like them. And that caused most of the Oregon subdivision to leave the realms of Avalon and go to the Empire of Adria, which put them in Gloucester. So Gloucester's numbers suddenly swelled, but we also had people leave Avalon to come to the Empire of Adria. The whole crew came over, the Tri-Cities subdivision came over, we'd recruited even more people locally. So we had doubled in size, they had doubled in size, but we were bigger to begin with, so now we were even much bigger. If I'd been in charge another year, we probably would have made Kingdom. But we ended up breaking up into smaller groups, which was good because we were too spread out. I mean, we have almost the entire Pacific Northwest in one subdivision, whereas in other parts of the Empire, they'll have two kingdoms in one city because they've got just a lot more people. But we hadn't gotten to the Seattle area yet, so we really hadn't gotten into the Boise area, so we hadn't gotten to our two largest population centers, so we weren't utilizing our subdivision as well as we could have. Where was I? So yeah, they got a whole bunch of people in from Avalon, including a whole bunch of steel fighters, and excellent rapier fighters. And so yeah, their army had gotten a lot bigger, and they knew what they were in for. Those people had played with the crew long enough, in Avalon a couple of times and against us in a couple of wars. They had some idea of what they were up against. So I was really expecting a really good war. Like I said, we've been preparing since 2 weeks before the first war, and we were really hoping for a good knockdown, drag-out fight. We brought more arts entries, because in the previous border war, they had actually gotten some points from arts. They had entered, they had so many new people that they were able to fill the lower lists better than we could because we had so many veteran people. So we came with all of the arts, just ridiculous amounts of arts entries. Everyone was ready to do archery. Our bowyer had gotten really good at making bows, and our Fletcher had gotten really good. Shaughnessy and Sir Hamish, and so loads of people had excellent archery equipment, and we had loaner gear so that everyone could shoot except for Corporal Ulrich. He had a special dispensation to not have to fight, or to not have to shoot archery, for reasons. And then, of course, combat. And like I said, we were organized into multiple companies with their own uniforms and their own battle cries and their own NCO corps and their own combat styles and all of that. And we were ready for this event. We were so stoked for it. We've been looking forward to it to a year. And the day came, and we got there, and we got the castle all set up, and Gloucester started arriving, and our people started arriving, and everyone got set up. And we didn't actually set up in separate camps, I don't think, this year. Everyone was just kind of mixed around in the camping area just to be more friendly rather than have that us versus them mentality, despite the fact that it was very much us versus them. That was all just part of the game, and we wanted to keep things friendly, and so people were just encamped where they wanted, which was nice. So there was a lot more socialization, and we got to really meet people. And like I said, there were people from Avalon who already knew the crew really well, and then they were getting to know the people from Adria and meeting the people that I'd been telling them stories about, and all of that. And it was a lot of fun. Now, the storyline for this one, as I said, was that they were tired of the yoke of oppression and all of that. And this all took place on, I think, Yahoo groups, because Facebook wasn't a thing yet. That's how long ago this took place. God, I'm old. But there'd been a lot of banter back and forth about, your oath of fealty, and yes, but you have oppressed us, and now freedom, and all of that. And I warned him, if you invade my land and attack my people and break your oath, I am going to punish you in the old Roman way. And apparently that went over his head. Or he didn't read it, or he didn't catch it, or he didn't realize what that meant. That will come up later. So they marched to war. They came into my land. They invaded me. They increased their army. They brought allies, and friends of mine were now fighting against me, and it was wonderful. And the way we set up the battles, the steel battles were fairly straightforward, just an open field battle, us versus them. I think we then did a champions battle, of course, and a bridge battle, as is traditional. And I had just gotten my helmet, my new helmet. I had been working on making Gothic armor since I started making my armor, because I love the look of Gothic plate. And I wanted a full suit of Gothic plate, and some of the parts I just had to break down and just make myself because I couldn't afford to buy them, but I could afford sheet metal because that was fairly cheap at the local welding shop, and I had the tools, and so I just had to teach myself how to make armor, and Gothic armor is complicated. It's not simple armor. I'd made simple suits already, but making Gothic plate was a lot more difficult, but the helmet was beyond my ability. I simply didn't have the tools or the know-how to make a Gothic sallet. And so I saved up as much as I could, and I bought one. And it had arrived like days before the war. I was so glad it arrived in time, and I got it all strapped, and I got it fitting me, and I got it to fit with my suit. But I hadn't actually fought in it yet. And that would also prove to be an issue. But I now had full matching Gothic plate, head to toe, quite literally. I had sabatons, I had foot armor that I made, and I think I can find some pictures. Here's a picture of me in my full plate, maybe. We'll see. And, I also have some video of me fighting in it from somewhere. But, opening event. Was a steel battle. We did opening court was done on the field of battle. So my army arrayed itself into its companies. There were banners, there were flags, they were all in their matching uniforms for each company. We went through all of the battle cries of each company. And they were all named after animals that were indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, specifically that were indigenous to their area of the Pacific Northwest. So I believe there was a badger company, and there was an ermine company, and there were a couple of others. All of the kids from all the subdivisions decided to form together into their own company that they named Squirrel Company, which was just fantastic. And somebody had actually made them little uniforms on their own flag, and their battle cry was "For Alhambra!" And it was so cool. Having all of the lieutenants, which were generally the great knights of the various subdivisions, were in charge of theirs with their banner and their tabards, and it was just amazing to see. And we marched forward against the Gloucester army in open court. Opening court was going to take place on the field of battle between me and Duke Dorn, and he's once again on the other side going, get in a line or something. Oh God. And we came marching forward, and it was all in character, and he was, I know I swore an oath, but my duty to my people is more important, and we deserve freedom, and we cannot grow on a yoke of oppression. And I said, okay, well, you have pushed my hand. I told you what would happen if you invaded my land. Let's do this. And the war started. And what was interesting was that the year before, we had only outnumbered them in steel 3-2. They had Dorn and Elric versus me, Kyle, and Sir Mikos. So we didn't outnumber them that much in steel. This time, because of the people that had joined from Avalon, the numbers were actually equal. We had managed to get 4 more steel fighters in our subdivision over the course of that year, but they managed to get 5 more. And so it was 7-7 in steel. Which, that could have gone either way, because I knew some of the Avalon fighters were excellent fighters, and a fair number of mine were still fairly fresh when it came to heavy combat. There were a fair number of the Avalon transplants were XSCA, so they had been doing heavy combat for a long time and were thoroughly well equipped and well prepared. But again, they weren't soldiers. They hadn't fought as a unit the way that I trained my men to. They also didn't have quite the level of technology that we had, because in the opening battle between 7-on-7 steel combat, I fielded 2 archers, myself and Sir Hamish, who was every bit as good, if not probably. I would argue he was a better archer than I was. So I had made him a suit of armor in a week and a half just so he could take the field at this war, and Lord was that a pain. I made it very Rohan-esque because he loved Lord of the Rings. And so I tried to make it as close as I could with the materials available. Again, I was not a great armor at this time. I'm still not a great armor. I am a vaguely passable armor at best. But I managed to make a suit that would fit him. And that was legal for our group. And so he took the field as an archer, and so did I. And this is where that having not fought in my helmet became a problem, because I was wearing a Gothic sallet, where the gorget, the bavor and the gorget attach to the breastplate, which means you really can't turn your head very much. You got a little bit of room side to side, but kind of like Batman, you kind of got to turn your whole body to see. And I figured that we would get one good volley with arrows. We'd fire our arrows at them, and then they would charge, because if they have 7 infantry and we have 5 infantry and 2 archers, if they charge, they would outnumber the infantry, and if they could overwhelm the infantry, then they had a potential to win. So both of my archers, myself and Sir Hamish, had pole axes that as soon as they got they rushed us, we could throw our bows and pick up our pole axes and defend ourselves. But I figured we'd get one good volley and then they would rush. And so we go to fire the first volley, and I go and pull back and realize I can't turn my head far enough to see where I'm aiming because my helmet is attached. And so I had to do this, turn my whole body with my bow pointing in the middle of nowhere, pick a target, turn back, and shoot blind. And by the grace of whatever gods favor me, I put an arrow right off the top of Dorn's helmet. And that is a shot I could definitely not make twice. It was just the fact that they were relatively close, the fact that they were relatively slow moving, and that he wasn't expecting it. I got so lucky. But I put that arrow right off the top of his head. At the same time, Hamish took out somebody. So their leader drops to his knees and falls dead. Another guy falls dead. So they're now down 2 fighters and their leader. And they didn't have an NCO corps. So when Dorn went down, the line stopped. And didn't know what to do. They didn't have a sergeant. They didn't have any corporals. I figured we'd get one volley. So I fired my one shot, saw that I'd got him, realized, well, we've taken them 2 of them out. They have to charge now or they're going to get picked off by archers. So I threw my bow, grabbed my poleaxe, and got on the line, and they just stood there. And Hamish shot another one. At which point they finally realized, yeah, we're going to get picked off if we don't close in. And they closed in, but now they were outnumbered 4-6. And they got slaughtered. I got to see Sergeant Major Kyle execute the most beautiful quintessential Roman shield maneuver imaginable. Guy came at him with a huge axe, a big old Lochaber axe, and came overhand and threw this thing at Sergeant Kyle. And Sergeant Kyle ducked and brought his tower shield up flat. The axe hits the tower shield, he takes the impact, and then he rushes and just guts the guy with his gladius. Right? Really, it would be a spatha. It was, yeah. Just guts the guy, repeatedly shanking him in the gut. And the guy didn't go down. He went to swing again, brought his axe up, at which point I stepped in and wailed on him with my pole axe right in the side of the head. Sergeant stabs him a couple more times, and finally the guy goes down. And it's like, why do you keep hitting me? Because you keep swinging the axe. So yeah, we tore him apart. I don't think we lost anybody. We then did a bridge battle, which this was on the drawbridge of the castle, so we had the wall protecting us, and they're trying to get through They only had the one long arm, which was that lock of barracks, but it had a blade that attached top and bottom and then had a gap in the middle. And so as soon as it came through the castle door, I hooked it with my poleaxe and pinned it to the door frame. And so they couldn't do anything with it. I think he eventually let go of it. But again, they couldn't get through our line because we knew what we were doing. We had more, our pike, we had, I think, 2 or 3 pikes. We didn't have, no archers were in the bridge battle, though, so they had that advantage. But again, we defeated them. We then did a champions battle, and I assume it was me and Dorn, and I defeated him handily. We then did rapier. And we did one open field battle, which was kind of a bridge battle, but it was more landing craft battle. So there were multiple, what were essentially like bridges, but they were meant to be landing craft. I think there were 2 or 3 of them that the enemies started in, and then the gangplanks came down and they came pouring out, and we were defending the beach, as it were. Because again, it was also meant to simulate an invasion. And we actually had guns, we had cannon. We had a grape shot cannon that unfortunately completely failed to kill anybody, but it terrified them. It fired surgical tubing, so it was a rubber band gun, essentially. A rubber band gun on steroids. And I had made this grape shot cannon. I think it held 5 or 7 rounds all loaded onto it at one time, and you pulled the chain and it fired them all, and it was brutal and nasty. And then we had multiple pistols, and the sergeant major had a musket, and I think we had at least 1 carbine, and then, of course, loads and loads of sword fighters. And we outnumbered them, though not by as much as we could have, because pretty much everyone who had joined from Avalon were rapier fighters, and some of them were incredibly good rapier fighters. Unfortunately for them, Sergeant Major and I and the other crew had been fighting them in Avalon long enough. We knew which were the great rapier fighters, and so we shot them. And archery was still allowed, so they did have some firepower, but not nearly as much as the fact that every one of my swordsmen had a pistol, because I knew how to make them. So I was mass-producing pistols, and everybody got a pistol, so they'd go to, ha-ha, blam, like you do. We then did a bridge battle, again, because those are loads of fun. And we barely won that one. That one was a close one. It was actually one of the Canadians who held the line for us and ended up winning that. I got taken out fairly early. We didn't allow missile weapons in the bridge battle, so our guns didn't take an advantage. And again, the fact that they had so many really good fencers, they very nearly won that one. And that was a lot of fun. Champions battle, I don't remember who their champion was. It was probably Elric again, but again, I was my champion, and I handily beat him. And then we got to what was going to be the big battle, or the whole point of the castle, which was the Shinai combat, which was the lightest form of combat, so there was more fighters for that. Pretty much anybody, the armor requirements for Shinai were remarkably low, and so lots and lots of people were able to suit up for that. And so the entire afternoon was intended to be an ongoing siege, rather than having the short battles where you fight it out and it's a couple of minutes long. No. This was going to be everyone has 20 lives, and the battle goes until one side is completely run out of lives. And there were multiple other parts. There was a champions battle that would take place in the middle. There was also a regicide portion, where whoever's leader ran out of lives. So either if Dorn ran out of lives or I ran out of lives, that was a point. And then there was a capture the flag portion of it, where both sides had a flag, and they could put it wherever they wanted on the battlefield, and whoever captured the other side's flag first got points. And then, of course, there was whichever army was annihilated. Now, this could take a very long time. And so it was set up that when you could take a break, you could step off and get water or rest or what have you. It was like a siege. It would just keep going until this whole thing was over. And that was the plan. And unfortunately, it didn't end up going quite to plan. We set up, they had their 3 trebuchets, none of which would actually fire. One of them, they never did get it to release. One of them released, but it fired like 10 feet in front of them. And one, it was a trebuchet, but it had just a milk crate for a bucket. So it didn't work either. Their ballista worked just fine. And so they really didn't have any good way of laying siege to our castle, because they didn't have any functioning siege engines. If I'd really been thinking about it and looking back at it now, we should have lent them some functioning siege engines or helped them get theirs working, but it was war and we're not going to help you. You grow up eventually. So this battle started going, and it kind of went slow at first. They fired arrows at us, we fired arrows back at them, but we were in a castle, so most of their arrows were, either falling into the mostly empty courtyard because all of my men were crowded up against the walls to give themselves cover, or they were on the outside of the castle just hitting the wall and falling down. And I'm up in the main tower inside the keep, which is where the flag was. Our flag was in the tower, in the keep, inside the curtain wall. Getting to it would have been a problem. Their flag was leaned up against a trebuchet somewhere in their siege camp. And standing up in the tower and getting to watch Sergeant Kyle be so completely in his element was just was my favorite part of the whole war. Was looking down from the tower and seeing the sergeant crouched down, going up and down the line, giving encouragement, keep your heads down, mark your targets, and just seeing him so perfectly in his element as a sergeant, it's like, oh, that's what this was all about. Finally, we started running low on ammo because, we had a dozen archers probably all firing arrows out. They couldn't fire the arrows back fast enough, and they didn't want to get close enough to shoot in, and so most of their arrows are dropping short. And so finally, I think I called on Sir Mikos to form up his company and lead a sortie, because his company was almost the size of their entire army. And if not, it would be a good fight. And so down came the drawbridge, out went their company, which I don't remember what their company was. Pretty sure Badger Company was Canada, Ermine Company was Kalispell. Might have been Wolverine Company, I don't remember now. But it was an animal indigenous to the Spokane area. And they went out, and they gathered up as much ammunition as they could, and they fought with the enemy and killed as many of them as they could, and they lost people and we lost people, and then what the survivors, I don't remember if they all got wiped out or what have you, but they came back. Everyone got, if they died, they got resurrected. They came back in. We sent out a different company to go lead a sortie. And we led another one, and we led another one. And eventually I led a sortie out, including all of the crew, most of the command column, grabbed a couple of other people, and we charged out, and we pretty much cleaned them out. I got taken out. I don't remember how I got taken out, whether a sword or an arrow, probably an arrow. And as I'm trucking myself back to resurrect, I see Sergeant Carl go by with the flag. Bless that man's heart. So yeah, we got the capture of the flag, which isn't surprising. Theirs was in their siege camp, which we were able to assault, whereas they would have to have gotten through the drawbridge, the door, and into the keep through my entire army. Really wasn't fair. Once again, if I was being more fair, I would have put it either right inside the door or maybe even outside the door to give them some kind of a chance. But I was an angry 20-something-year-old, and you learn about fairness eventually. And that was kind of why it started to fall apart, because they didn't have a chance. It wasn't fun. In the steel battle, it was equal. They thought they could have a chance, and they did fight well. And in Rapier, they were able to put up a good fight. But in the Chennai, it was so one-sided that it wasn't fun. And that wasn't the intention. That really wasn't. And again, looking back now, I realize that, yeah, things were horrifically stacked in our favor because we had a castle. But the opportunity to have mitigated that was available to them. They could have started preparing earlier. They could have gotten better siege equipment. They could have built things. I, at one point in the game, had a covered battering ram that we built and that we covered using our tower shields, and that had an actual ram that swung because we'd had a castle before. And so you could actually wheel this battering ram to the doors and batter down the door. And we had done that. We had done that in wars before, so I knew it was possible to lay siege. We did, like I said, we did drills of how to do testudos and get close to the door and all of that. They could have taken one of the arms off of the trebuchet and made it into a battering ram and formed up a shield wall and I'd have allowed it, but they didn't. And a lot of that was just because, again, they didn't have the soldier mentality that we had. The martial mentality of how to fight as a unit, how to fight as an army as opposed to a bunch of fighters. And that was just from largely a lack of experience because, again, that subdivision was only 2 years old. They hadn't had as many wars as we had. They didn't have me or the sergeant major or people of our mentality of soldiers, of war, of what war should be like. And so it ended up being horrifically one-sided. It didn't have to be. Like I said, they could have done better. They could have had their own. They could have brought their own castle and set up their own fortifications. There's lots of things they could have done that would have balanced things, but they failed to do any of them. And so it ended up not being fun because of me just sending out sorties into their war camp and slaughtering them over and over again with these organized companies in uniform marching in unison, and they had no way to defend against that. And yeah, they started getting they weren't having fun. And they were starting to get upset, and they were starting to get aggressive, and it started to unravel. We should have taken a break, taken a breather, put things on pause, tried to rebalance things, give them some siege engines, or just put the door down and make it so that the drawbridge can't be raised anymore. There are things that we could have done that would have balanced it, would have made it a lot more fun. But we failed to do so before it was too late. But there were some fun stories. Now, when I say it was too late, eventually one of their people hit one of my people way too hard, and the guy wasn't wearing proper back-of-the-neck protection and took a blow to the back of the neck that he claims actually fractured a vertebrae. We'd been telling him that the back of his helmet didn't cover that part of his neck forever, but he kept arguing that, no, well, by the rules, those kinds of people. And that ended up calling an end to the war. We had done the Champions Battle. This is where some of the fun stories came out. We did do the Champions Battle, and we did that by sending a message. With the messenger, I wrote a note and wrapped it around a piece of ammunition and flung it at the enemy from the messenger. And the note simply said, Der Mutter, because Dorn's character was German. Der Mutter is, of course, your mother. He reads the note and he just yells back to the castle, my mother was a saint! So from the tower, I stick my head and go, yeah, Saint Falacia, patron saint of blowjobs. Things got nasty real quick. He came back and goes, well, at least she's making a living. I came back with, 2-for-1 sales, honoring her competitors' coupons? How is that a functioning business model? And at that point, he challenged me to a duel. As you would. Sorry if any children are watching this. It was war. War, I tell you. Language gets rough. So I sally forth, and I defeat him quite handily in single combat. Murder, murder, murder. Off he went. But there was another moment with Sergeant Major Kyle that was just so beautiful. One of the rules about this battle, since it was multiple resurrection, if you got killed while out on the field of battle, you couldn't pick stuff up. So I couldn't send my army out, all of them get killed, and then have the ghosts, the people who haven't resurrected, pick up equipment, pick up arrows or javelins or whatever, once you're dead. Now, they had unfortunately misinterpreted that to where if you got killed, you had to drop all of your gear. I don't know where they got that, but there were a couple of people that thought that. So you'd see someone on the far side of the battlefield take an arrow, and they'd throw down their gear and go resurrect. And I don't know if they were doing that out of... I believe they were doing that because they believed they couldn't carry stuff while dead. They also might have been doing it out of disgust. I don't know. But the Sergeant Major led a sortie out for ammo gathering. That was the purpose of the sortie because we were out of ammunition. So he led a sortie out, and they managed to wipe out the enemy army. The whole enemy army had to go and resurrect. And while the enemy army was resurrecting, whatever remained of Sergeant Kyle's sortie were gathering as much of the gear as they could. They're grabbing all of the arrows, they're grabbing anything they could. And then the entire enemy army resurrected, and they decided to wait until they'd all resurrected and come in together, rather than trickling in as they got resurrected individually and just getting picked off by the Sergeant Major's troops. So they all came in as one big wave, one big shield wall comes marching forward, and most of Sergeant Major Kyle's people retreat back to the castle. They take whatever they managed to grab and they retreat back to the castle. But not the Sergeant Major. He's still picking stuff up. He's got... So remember, they were still doing I got shot, I dropped all my stuff. So he had picked up a couple of their bows, he had picked up some of their swords, and was now just gathering as many arrows and javelins as he could. His arms were full, and more are picking up. The army's marching forward, he's picking up stuff, the army's marching at him, he's picking up stuff. Somebody in the army line finally gets up to him and just goes, "You're dead?" And he goes, "Yep." And runs back to resurrect with a massive armload of all of their gear. At which point, some of them were confused, and the marshal, and it was their marshal, explained, "No, you don't have to drop it if you get killed. You just can't pick anything else up." And they're all just going, "Oh." It was also possible to take prisoners, kind of. You weren't allowed to kill yourself. So if you managed to, take somebody's arms and legs, you could then drag them into the castle and leave them in a corner somewhere. We never got to do that, and I'm glad. That would have been just dickish. But we have done that. We did that in Avalon to somebody once. We defended an enemy. We cut off both of his arms and one of his legs and then defended him from his own team so they couldn't kill him, so he couldn't resurrect. He didn't think it was funny. We thought it was hilarious. Looking back now, of course, that wasn't cool. But you learn. But anyway, after the guy got injured and we realized that tempers were flaring and that things nobody was having fun. Our side wasn't really having fun anymore because there wasn't a challenge. Their side definitely wasn't having fun because it was just them getting slaughtered over and over again. And so they conceded the points because we obviously, Dorn had more deaths than I did. Their army had lost a lot more people than we had. So they conceded the field of battle, and we let it be at that. And we should have done more to clear the air. We should have done some fun battle. We really should have let them defend the castle, is what we absolutely should have done at that point. Okay, we got the fun advantage. Now let's have a fun battle. You guys get the castle. We'll show you how you could have laid siege to it. And we might have been able to. We might have failed. Who knows? But again, hindsight. I realize these things now. I didn't realize them at the time. In the meantime, we had completely swept archery. I don't remember whether I or Hamish got the Champions Battle Point for archery. I don't know who got it on the lower list. It might have been my younger sister. Stelina was an excellent archer. I know she got the Champions Point in one of the Crown Wars for the Emperor. So she actually had a Crown War Archery Champion ribbon, which was pretty impressive. I think she got personally thanked by the Emperor when he came to visit. She played him music that she had composed even. So yeah, my littlest sister is cool. All of my sisters are cool. Yeah. And we'd also then completely swept arts. They had entered a huge number of arts the first year, and I had really figured that is where they were going to shine. That they were going to, they knew they didn't have us in combat, and they probably wouldn't have us in archery, but I figured that they would really dump into the arts, and they didn't. They brought 5 entries, and we brought 70. Because each person could enter, I think, either 3 or 5, and a lot of my people had entered multiple things. I entered a suit of armor as my entry, and we completely blew that all. So they got 0 points. They didn't get a single point in that war. And the problem was they went into the first war knowing they were going to get slaughtered, and they still got points. They went into the second war thinking they had a decent chance of at least getting some points, and they got none. And so there ended up being just a lot of displeasure. I was at this point angry because I had come here wanting a good war. I had expected them to put up a better fight. And they didn't. And once again, in hindsight, I realize expecting them to have risen to my level of warfare in a year was unrealistic and unfair. That it had taken us 7 years to get to that point, or 5 years, or 6 years, I guess it would be, to get to the point that we were at, and expecting them to be able to do that in 1 year with, it just wasn't fair. But I was annoyed because I had wanted a good fight and I had not gotten one. And so I carried out the threat. When I called Dorn into court, I asked him, "Do you remember what I said I would do to you if you invaded my land and lost?" And he said, "Something about lions?" I said, "No. I said I would punish you in the old Roman way." and I called for my sergeants, who carried in a St. Andrew's cross, and I crucified him. Yep, I crucified the leader of another subdivision on a St. Andrew's cross, which is an X rather than T for those of you who are curious. Why did I have a St. Andrew's cross, you ask? Well, if you remember the story about us torching the Emperor, I kept a pair of professional dominatrixes on retainer in case I needed somebody tortured. They also did my taxes. They were tax lawyers. In exchange, I would fix their computers and occasionally build things for them, like St. Andrew's crosses for their stuff. So I used to lead a much more interesting life than I do now. Anyway, so I crucified him because that's what I said I would do. He thought it was hilarious. Some of the people in his subdivision really got upset about that. They didn't think that was funny at all. He thought it was hilarious, or at least he said he thought it was hilarious. I don't know. We later discovered he didn't much care for me, so who knows? Yeah, he got crucified. There was also someone in his army that had actually offered to fight for us as a mercenary. We ended up turning him down, and we called him out on it for his treachery, and he was thrown in the stocks, and that was the end of it. It was one of those, you don't want it. It's a good idea to occasionally just call it out, have it done with, and then it be over with, as opposed to it lingering forever. Like, no, he was punished. Yeah, so that was kind of the story. And afterwards, we were able to sit down and have fun, and there was good food, and we packed up the castle and we went home. But pictures of this got posted in the Imperial newsletter, and the stories of how the war went down spread throughout the Empire. And that is why the next time there was an Imperial Crown War, the Imperial contenders reached out to me. I don't know how they got my phone number. But they both ended up calling me and offering to hire us. And I was still confused on how do these people even know who I am? I'm some schmuck from up north. Yeah, but it turns out word spreads fast when you crucify a duke. Unfortunately, there was not a third border war. When I stepped down, different people took over, and for various reasons, and it was probably inevitable. It probably would have happened if I had remained duke anyway, and then it would have been my problem. But Alhambra broke up. So Montana and half of Idaho and Montana became a subdivision. Northern Idaho and Eastern Washington became a subdivision. The Tri-Cities became a subdivision. Canada became a subdivision. I think North Central Washington became a subdivision. I don't even know what happened to everything west of the Cascades. We ended up going with the Montana group. And as a result, there never was a third border war. We did now have enough subdivisions to have a good banner war, so banner wars were now more interesting because all those various subdivisions could now fight for the banner. And that's where you end up with things like the War of the Mercenaries and various other wars. The crew continued to grow. Once I stepped down, I was able to then fully focus on the crew, and we eventually became very powerful and imperially recognized. We got the Imperial Seal of Excellence, but a lot of mistakes were made in that war through the exuberance of youth and just inexperience. And it was a shame because it really could have been a really, really fun event. And I would have liked that tradition to carry on because the stories that would have gone back and forth, because the next year they would have been hosting. So were we trying to reconquer them? What was the story? It would have been interesting. And especially once you ended up with different leaders, once I was no longer the Duke, if Alhambra is invading, why? Why is the new Duke invading Gloucester? If somebody ended up replacing Dorne, there could have been great potential for great stories that just ended up not happening, which was a shame. But fun was had. There was still a lot of fun, a lot of camaraderie. I think it started to drizzle towards the end, but it was fun. So that was the second border war, or at least all of the highlights that I can remember. For the next time, we will continue to put the history of the Kitty Pike blocks, how the crew learned to do Elizabethan military reenactment. And there's some great stories there, going back to my days in Bristol. I think there's the cigars and gunpowder story was from Bristol. There's a couple of others. But that is what ultimately led to us guest lecturing at Columbia Basin College. So there's some fun stories. Train! The story of how my brother, Captain Xavier, learns about art. My brother took an art class in college, and that led to an interesting philosophical discussion and how we decided how we define art. And there's some hilarious stories and pictures that go along with that. And for the final story, I don't think I have ever told the story of the Second Holy War. So, I'll put that one down there. The Second Holy War, fought between Bishop Guillaume and I believe, I want to say Brother Liam. I might have to look into that one. My memory is foggy now. But there you have it. Those are the options for next time. Survey will be down below. Let me know what you thought of this story. Let me know what you think of what your thoughts on times when you've been at an event that was not poorly balanced, or one where something really was well balanced. Because I have been at a number of events where the people who were in charge were incredibly good at recognizing when an event was imbalanced to the point that people weren't having fun, and were able to balance it in order to allow it to be. And that's a lot more difficult in something that's actually contested. But let me know. Let me know what you guys have seen for that sort of thing. So, there you have it. Thank you for watching. Mwah! This man is a schmuck who never remembers to put me in the video. Do the thing. Murder you. Murder.